In 1987, an elite Soviet military unit was sent into the frozen heart of Siberia and never came back. Officially, the mission never happened. No records, no names, no explanation. But unofficial documents, leaked years later, speak of something real. Something that turned soldiers to stone in front of a steel hatch buried in the ice. What happened down there? A low-frequency signal, a bunker that shouldn't exist, a force that seemed to respond to human presence and defied logic, physics, maybe even time itself. This is one of the darkest and most obscure Cold War stories ever whispered. And if it's true, it changes everything we think we know about what was hidden behind the Iron Curtain. Now, with fragments pulled from secret archives and testimonies from men who were never supposed to speak, you're about to hear the story the government tried to erase.
In the final years of the Cold War, paranoia wasn't just a byproduct of politics. It was politics itself. The Iron Curtain didn't just divide continents, it also shrouded secrets that defied human comprehension. The Soviet Union, in a growing desperation to match every Western stride, wasn't solely investing in nuclear weapons or the space race. No, they were pouring billions into something far more insidious: secrecy. Into mysteries that couldn't be measured by conventional science, into arcane knowledge that should have remained sealed. In dusty rooms, hidden beneath the imposing architecture of government buildings, somewhere deep within a labyrinthine bureaucracy, behind red steel doors that no one dared question or even peek through, something began to stir. A whisper echoed through the silent corridors, an idea as audacious as the vastness of the Soviet Empire itself. It was the beginning of something that would challenge logic, physics, and perhaps even sanity.
This project, shrouded in layers of confidentiality, was known only by its code name, Institute 22. It wasn't a common research department or a conventional military unit. It was a classified entity designed not to study the paranormal as a distant phenomenon, but to understand it, contain it, and ultimately store it. Officially, it never existed. Its name appeared in no public records, no military almanac. But according to now declassified documents, fragments of truth released decades after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Institute 22 was established sometime in the 1960s. It was a desperate response to the increasingly frequent and inexplicable reports emerging from all corners of the vast Soviet territories. The generals, old war wolves with minds hardened by strategy and conflict, firmly believed in a simple yet terrifying maxim: if the Americans were exploring psychic abilities, investigating UFO sightings, or unraveling interdimensional phenomena, the Soviet Union had no choice but to follow suit. Or even better, get there first. The obsession with supremacy extended beyond the tangible into the realm of the impossible. Institute 22 recruited its members from a peculiar source: the military ranks themselves. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. They sought individuals with highly unusual psychological profiles. Men and women who possessed an innate capacity for isolation, unquestioning obedience, and, above all, an emotional resilience that bordered on the supernatural. People who wouldn't break, wouldn't crumble, wouldn't go insane when confronted with the inexplicable, the irrational, with what the ordinary human mind would immediately reject. Their assignments, on paper, seemed simple: reconnaissance and suppression. But the truth was far darker. Many of these elite soldiers were sent into the vast wilderness, to the far reaches of the Soviet Empire, and never returned. Their names were erased, their existences swept under the rug of history as if they had never been. The missions took them to remote places, forgotten even by the most detailed maps. The frozen plains of Siberia, where the wind howled like an eternal lament. The dense, dark forests near the Ural Mountains, where ancient trees seemed to whisper secrets into the void. And the isolated shores of Lake Baikal, a mirror of water so deep that it was said to guard monsters from primordial ages. These were places already haunted by ancient folklore, by legends whispered from generation to generation. Locals told stories in hushed tones about creatures lurking in the shadows of the forests, about lights dancing in the night sky, defying any astronomical explanation, and about men who walked into the trees and simply disappeared as if the earth itself swallowed them. Most of the Soviet population never heard these stories, not because they were distant legends, but because they weren't allowed to hear them. Any incident involving the unexplained was immediately silenced, suffocated before it could even breathe. Reports were confiscated, witnesses were threatened, their minds forced to forget what they had seen, or, in more extreme cases, the very memory of their existence was erased.
One such case, one of many that filled the sealed archives of Institute 22, involved a soldier known only by his first name, Sergei. In 1978, Sergei was part of a reconnaissance unit sent to investigate a supposed meteorite fall. The location was inhospitable, covered in virgin snow that reflected the cold Siberian sun. But they found no meteorite, just a burned clearing with strange combustion patterns in the snow that didn't fit any known theory. And, coming from underground, a rhythmic, almost hypnotic hum that seemed to vibrate directly in their bones. Sergei was the only one to return. His debriefing report, shrouded in coded medical and military terms, spoke of temporary blindness and severe hallucinations. His report was sealed, buried under the layers of secrecy of Institute 22. The names of his unit were erased from the records, as if they had never been assigned to that fateful mission. Another case, even more enigmatic, occurred in 1983. A listening post near the Arctic Circle, amidst the deafening silence of the tundra, registered a signal at 3:17 a.m. It was a clear, mechanical sound, almost like Morse code, but distorted, fragmented, and looping, like a message from a nightmare. A team was dispatched to investigate the origin of the signal, but upon approaching the station, contact was suddenly lost. Days later, they were found wandering miles away, frozen, with severe frostbite and completely unable to speak. One of them, in a feverish delirium, had written a phrase in the snow repeatedly until his frozen fingers refused to continue. It wasn't the cold.
Incidents like these were buried, their evidence pulverized. But within Institute 22, they were pieces of a larger, more sinister puzzle. The confidential files of the Institute spoke of recurring patterns, audio interference that distorted reality, unnatural lights that seemed to emanate from nowhere, and, most frequently, an overwhelming fear that consumed everyone involved, a sense of primordial dread that penetrated the soul.
Some reports described strong electromagnetic pulses capable of shutting down complex equipment. Others, anomalies that bent time itself, clocks spinning backward, radio transmissions that seemed to come from future dates. The fabric of reality in certain places seemed to unravel. Many of these events converged on a single specific region, a stretch of dense primordial forest in the heart of Siberia, near a long-abandoned weather station, corroded by wind and solitude. It was a cold, desolate place where the snow fell incessantly and the silence was broken only by the howl of the wind. The kind of place no one would go unless it was a direct and irrevocable order. And in early 1987, that's exactly what happened. A signal was picked up again, low frequency, pulsating, unnatural. And then the command was given. 25 soldiers were dispatched, armed, trained, and prepared for anything they could expect. But what awaited them there, what lurked in the shadows of that cursed forest, was unlike anything the Soviet army had ever faced. It was the culmination of decades of secrets, an encounter with something even the deepest Cold War paranoia could not have predicted. And the fate of these 25 men would remain forever an unanswered question, echoing in the vast, cold silence of Siberia.
The order came on January 14, 1987. In the depths of the Siberian winter, as the wind howled a monotonous song across the frozen steppes, a signal was detected again. Not by civilian sources, nor by ordinary weather stations, but deep within a military surveillance network near Norilsk, an isolated, frigid city synonymous with secrets and mineral extraction. The frequency of this signal wasn't just unusual, it pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, a cadence that belonged to no known phenomenon, be it cosmic or terrestrial. The engineers monitoring it, veterans of countless hours analyzing static and coded transmissions, described it as something alive. Not biological, of course not, but something that responded, that adapted, that altered its pattern every time they tried to record or measure it. It was as if the energy itself knew it was being watched, as if it mocked the scientific methods trying to contain it. Moscow's response was immediate, and it came from the top. Institute 22, that secret, almost mythical entity that dealt with the unexplained, was reactivated.
On January 19th, just 5 days after the initial detection, a unit of 25 soldiers was rapidly assembled at a forward operating base. The surviving records, fragmented and almost unintelligible, indicate this wasn't a typical detachment. No, far from it. The composition was deliberately peculiar. It included elite combat personnel. Yes, men and women trained for the worst conditions. But there was also a psychological operations officer whose role was as ambiguous as the mission itself. A scientific consultant, a man of academia thrust into a scenario that would challenge all his logic. And, most disturbingly, 2 men whose names were completely redacted, erased as if they had never existed, mere shadows without identity. Their orders were brief, direct, and incredibly vague. Enter the marked coordinates in the Siberian forest. Locate the source of the signal. Suppress, contain, or eliminate. No one told them what it was.
What needed suppressing? What would be contained? And what, exactly, were they supposed to eliminate? The uncertainty hung over them like the icy morning fog. They departed at dawn. The temperature, a torturous minus 31 degrees Celsius, minus 23.8 degrees Fahrenheit, cut the skin like ice blades. Visibility was low, the air thick with ice crystals, but the forest seemed eerily quiet. Not just silent, the kind of silence you expect in the vastness of a winter landscape, but muffled, as if sound itself was more rarefied there, absorbed by something that transcended physics. The crunching snow beneath their boots seemed the only intrusion into a world where even echoes refused to linger. Each step was an act of courage, each breath a challenge. Around 2 p.m., after hours of arduous marching through snow-covered pines, the soldiers reached the old weather station. The sight chilled them more than the Arctic air. What they found was wrong. The structure, abandoned since the late 60s, should have collapsed under the weight of years of snow and ice. Instead, it stood partially intact, a grim silhouette against the white horizon. The walls, somehow, seemed to have been reinforced from within, with materials that didn't match the original architecture. Ice had formed upwards from the ground in strange spear-like growths, as if the earth were trying to defend itself from something or someone. And behind the station, almost buried in the freshly fallen snow, they found a steel hatch. It wasn't part of the original structure. It was new. So new it seemed to have emerged from some place or some time that wasn't the present. The hatch was sealed, with no visible lock, just a flat surface with a faint symbol etched into it. 3 concentric circles, intersected by an arrow pointing downwards. A symbol that evoked ancient mysteries, or perhaps something completely alien. The science officer, a man of logical and analytical mind, took photos. None of them, absolutely none, developed. The camera wouldn't register the image, as if the reality around the hatch refused to be captured. The psychologist, instead of analyzing the strangeness of the environment, began complaining of splitting headaches. Other soldiers reported nausea and memory lapses, moments of mental clarity dissolving into a fog. One of them swore he saw movement in the tree line, a shadow passing, a swift blur, but no footprints ever appeared in the untouched snow. And then, the humming began. A deep vibration that resonated through their chests like a second heartbeat, an alien rhythm overlaying their own. Some described it as a metallic singing, a sound of celestial spheres that should never have been heard. Others said it sounded like a voice buried in the bones of the earth, an ancient whisper coming from a place far, far below the surface, from a time before time. Against all orders, compelled by an uncontrollable curiosity or an invisible influence, a subset of the team, 8 soldiers, decided to open the hatch. They used thermite, cutting through the steel with an incandescent heat that contrasted with the deadly cold around them. What they found down there would never be disclosed, never be recorded in any history book, because radio contact was lost minutes after their entry. The last transmission received on the surface was scrambled, distorted by noise and inexplicable interference. But one phrase, in Russian, cut through the static with chilling clarity. "It's not dead, it's waiting." Within hours, the remaining team on the surface, those who had stayed behind, began reporting erratic behavior. Two soldiers turned on each other in a senseless fight, their eyes vacant. A third wandered into the forest, simply disappearing into the white vastness, never to be found again. The psychologist, the one who had complained of headaches, collapsed and suffered cardiac arrest right there in the snow, his body becoming an inert mound under the icy gaze of the sky. A recovery unit was dispatched 3 days later. The weather was clear, visibility perfect, but what they found at the weather station was a testament to absolute horror. The station was destroyed, not blown up, not imploded, it was peeled, as if some unimaginable force had ripped its layers inside out. Metal beams were twisted outwards at impossible angles, like the claws of a monster. The surrounding snow had melted in a perfect 60-meter diameter circle, revealing the bare, dark earth beneath it, a circle that defied the laws of thermodynamics. Of the 25 soldiers, only one body was recovered. It had been modified. The skin calcified like stone, hard and cold to the touch. The mouth open in a silent scream, an echo of terror that had become permanent. The rest of the team, missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains on the snow, just footprints that led into the circle, into the disfigured station, and none leading out. The entire mission was sealed under a maximum classification directive, buried deep within secret archives, far from any light or questioning. To this day, no official comment has been made by the government, by any authority, but whispers persist among retired officers who still carry the weight of what they saw, in records buried under piles of bureaucracy, and in strange readings that are still picked up near that forest. Some say the signal never stopped. It just stopped broadcasting to us.
The aftermath of that fateful mission in the Siberian forest wasn't marked by explosions or the noise of a rescue effort, but by an absolute silence. Officially, there was no record of any operation in that remote region. No dispatch order, no casualty report, no soldier's name even existed in the military records. The entire mission had vanished, swallowed, just like the soldiers themselves, by the relentless, silent vastness of the forest they were sent to investigate. Only a few internal memos, sealed with a classification level that most generals couldn't even access, circulated in very closed military circles. It was as if reality itself had bent, erasing the existence of those men and their encounter with the unexplained. But in the weeks and months that followed, the consequences of that vacuum began to spread, like invisible waves of disturbance.
Engineers monitoring nearby transmission stations began to report strange data corruption. Files would vanish without a trace, as if swallowed by a digital entity. Radio signals would enter an endless loop, repeating indecipherable fragments. And, in rarer and more disturbing cases, entire machines would turn themselves on, operating in the void of empty rooms, transmitting the same low-frequency hum that had triggered the original deployment. It was a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, an audio spectrum that haunted those who had heard it. The station in Norilsk, where the signal had first been picked up, was quietly decommissioned. No official reason was given, of course. But everyone who had worked on the signal team was one by one reassigned to unrelated posts, some to tedious administrative duties in distant offices, others simply retired under conditions that raised more questions than answers. The trauma and mystery they had experienced couldn't be discussed, not even among themselves. Years later, a private report, obtained through a leak from a KGB defector, brought a chilling fragment to light. It mentioned an audio recording captured during the mission's final minutes. It was hopelessly corrupted, almost inaudible through the grainy static. But in one brief, icy moment, a single voice could be heard, a whisper that seemed to come from the abyss. In Russian, "You shouldn't have opened it." And then, the silence returned, denser than before. Beyond the digital echoes, the disappearances began. These weren't newspaper reports or official news stories, but whispers that circulated among the remote villages, the isolated mining outposts, and the small communities in the regions near the forest. Civilians, ordinary people, started reporting loved ones vanishing without a trace. Not in massive waves that could be attributed to a natural disaster or a criminal event. The patterns were scattered, irregular, and all the more unsettling for their unpredictability. People would go out to chop wood and never return. Experienced hunters, who knew every trail and every shadow of the forest, stopped venturing into its depths, their faces hardened by a life in the wild now marred by a palpable fear. Local folklore, once told with an ironic smile around crackling bonfires, became serious again, a dark omen of a truth revealing itself. People spoke of the trees that hum, trees that, on nights of absolute silence, seemed to vibrate with an imperceptible energy, an echo of the signal that had drawn the soldiers. They spoke of the thing that lives under the ice, an entity that, according to the legends, fed on life and sanity. Even the most skeptical, the men and women who had laughed at these stories in their youth, began to avoid the area entirely. The invisible perimeter of fear was expanding. Some, driven by curiosity or the need to understand, tried to report what they were witnessing. A respected geologist who was researching seismic activity in the region submitted a series of reports to the state about inexplicable anomalies. He described unusual vibrations, like distant subterranean movements, precisely at the edge of that melted clearing, the perfect 60-meter circle that defied physics. His research was solid, his data irrefutable, but he was told in no uncertain terms to revise his findings and focus on natural explanations. His superiors, with a look that contained a veiled warning, advised him to forget what he had seen. 2 weeks later, he also disappeared, without warning, without a trace. The message was clear. The mystery of the Siberian forest was to be forgotten, erased from the collective consciousness. Decades passed. The Soviet Union, that colossus of steel and ideology, finally crumbled, disintegrating into a new world order. But the mystery of that forest, the secret of Institute 22, did not. It remained a persistent dark legend, growing slowly, transforming into an urban legend. In the early 2000s, with the popularization of the internet and the thirst for urban legends, amateur explorers began to search for the location. Online forums, full of conspiracy theories and horror stories, referred to the area as the Dead Circle. Most never found anything, just endless trees and white snow, an overwhelming emptiness that seemed to mock their efforts. A few, however, returned, pale and disturbed, claiming to have heard the low hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself, a dissonant melody that sent chills down their spines. One expedition team, more ambitious or perhaps more reckless, managed to upload a distorted recording to the internet before losing contact completely. The last image? The final frame of that grainy, static-filled video? An indistinct view of what appeared to be a steel hatch, half covered by snow, and most chilling of all, glowing faintly with an internal spectral light, pulsing weakly in the twilight. Today, Institute 22 no longer exists, at least not officially. Its records were burned, its members dispersed, their memories fragmented. But some say its mission never ended, that the events in that frozen forest were just one piece of something much larger, a cosmic puzzle we've only just begun to glimpse. That the Cold War wasn't just a conflict of ideologies, nations, or nuclear arsenals, but of reality itself. And that somewhere, far beneath the snow, under the veil of silence, an unspeakable truth still awaits. Something that remembers.
Although no official report was ever released about what happened in the Siberian forest, fragments of truth have a way of slipping through the cracks. In the early 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, a number of intelligence archives were quietly declassified. Among them was a reference to Institute 22, a top-secret unit tasked with investigating paranormal phenomena across Soviet territories. Its existence, once denied, is now confirmed, though what it actually studied remains redacted. Other scattered clues emerged from unrelated sources. A 1993 Russian Ministry of Defense memo referencing geomagnetic interference near Norilsk. A shortwave transmission caught by radio enthusiasts in the late 2000s, repeating a distorted low-frequency pulse matching no known pattern. Even the infamous UVB-76 buzzer station, which continues to broadcast to this day, has occasionally emitted irregular tones eerily similar to those described by survivors. None of these details alone confirm the story we've told, but together they form a strange constellation of unanswered questions. Perhaps what happened wasn't just a classified mission, but a forgotten war on the edges of reality itself. If you've come across similar signals, hidden files, or obscure military references in old archives, share them. Comment below. Let others see what might otherwise remain buried. Because some stories don't end, they echo.